Sound?
Yes, I did put sound on. Thank you for reminding me. Excellent. Welcome back. Glad that we're here. So after the Roper fight, which of course is the worst time to lose a bunch of footage, we lost a bunch of footage.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about initial reactions to Clarion's death. We did, of course, end up meeting Kretha right away. And I was pretty happy with how that worked out because it again gave me a chance to work in the idea that multiple groups representing multiple, areas are trying to find the forge now that it's been found, or now that it's been sort of vaguely located. And the idea that goblins also want to get a hold of the forge, I thought was really nice. And I could just throw in the rest of your party got killed by the Roper, and here you are. It was a very convenient, the second conveniently placed goblin PC that we've had in our campaign since level 1. Now we started the episode. We started the episode with just the best little short animation, which I will be putting onto YouTube. I don't unfortunately have it ready to go right now, but it was really awesome and involved sort of like fighting between the characters, right? In grief.
Yeah, you get to see all of us do really bad voiceovers.
None of us have professional setups, I don't think.
I have a professional setup, but it was...
no, it wasn't even that. It was the fact that there was some people overacting and other people underacting, and those people switched at least twice.
Yes. That
was one of those.
I deliberately made several cuts at differing tones specifically to...
No. The final cut is the director's choice. Thank you.
The director decided to overact and underact half of the people, and those things switched.
And my mic was so echoey, and like I was in a sound booth, and I realized later, having to do stuff for a different thing I was doing voices for, that my husband's settings do not work for me because he's from here at the mic and is yelling and doing stuff. I'm like right here. So it sounds horrible. I did not realize how bad, I'm like, this is a professional setup. Why does it sound like I'm in a garage?
When it comes to like pre-recording stuff, I've learned that the lower gain, the better. You can always increase it later.
Oh, he had
but
it
being
up
too
so
loud,
high.
yeah.
I don't know what he was doing.
I thought it
works for him.
I thought it was a very cute little thing that you could definitely tell an amateur put it together. With amateur software. Approved licenses over here.
A thing happens pretty early on after Clarion's death that I think we should talk about a little bit, and I'd probably like to pull some sound for so that I can put together a little lost episode montage. One of the first things that happened after some conversations went down is that Lore took the necromancer whistle and brought Clarion's corpse back as a zombie.
Yep.
And that is something I would like to get a little bit of remembrance from each of you, because I know it was a pivotal moment in a lot of role play. And I'm not gonna call on anyone. This isn't a classroom. Thank you, Zagreus. I appreciate you as always.
Thing. Well, I remember because Charlotte had to get Lore up, had to give one of the last health potions we had to Lore even after the Roper had died, because Lore was already unconscious.
And Clarion was the only healer.
Oh, I mean, technically Meepo is, but...
A little bit.
Nobody cares about Meepo, listen.
But Meepo was out of spells at that point.
That is a damn dirty lie.
Listen, the number of times that we have forgotten, and you have forgotten Meepo...
That he even existed, yeah.
I completely believe that my statement was 100% true.
I care about Meepo.
Jeff doesn't even care about Meepo.
That's a lie.
Jen, your volume is super low again.
My volume?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Charlotte got Lore up. Calder and Meepo were, digging through the Roper's body to find Clarion's body. And yes.
Yes.
And anything else that was there. Laura grabs the whistle, starts blowing on it, and Charlotte, well, one thing brought up that one, you need to attune to it, and two, animating a body as an undead makes it a lot harder to resurrect them later.
And also, we had used the charge for the day, raising the butler.
Yes, if I recall properly, this is and I think I mentioned at some point that I was making a story call that this could work because that's the way it works, right? Rule of cool is pretty important, and I think this was a really important
Well, there were two
action.
charges.
Yeah,
you could do further charges. It was just the third one was gonna want to kill you. It wasn't that the charge was up for the day, was it?
You could only blow it once every 24 hours.
Okay.
You could target multiple bodies.
But you can maintain up to 2 at a time, yeah.
That's what
You're not wrong
Well, they
about
have to
trying
do
to
this
animate a third
thing.
one, and it may be freaking out on you, but yeah.
Oh, that would have been interesting to have Clarion's corpse
Be the
trying
freak
to.
out.
Oh God, yeah, that would have been.
I think it would have also been interesting to have Clarion come back as a revenant when we blew the whistle. Like, well, no, like the character type. The character type.
Yeah.
Where it's like the PC like revived thing from the Ravnica series.
That's not
possible.
necessarily a bad idea. Like I'm kind of sad that I didn't think of it as an option.
That's what I thought you were gonna do with it. Because that, like, let me find the species.
Yeah,
What
they get their like it would have replaced Clarion's species type, but that
Yeah, the reborn from the Ravenloft setting, the one that was like, it's like you hit death and then you're like pop up.
That definitely is another way this could have gone. That would have been a very, very interesting change in how this all shook out. It didn't even occur to me at the time, I'm not gonna lie, but it definitely could have been a great way to go.
So not
Just
a
like-
revenant. That's a different thing.
You know,
Okay.
the reborn. So like the benefit, like what you get from reborn is you gain the lineage, like you can get it in the game. Basically, is you can have all of your standard stuff from your previous species if you want. If not, you immediately gain 2 skill proficiencies, and then like, so you could have your feat, you could keep it, or you can get 2 new skill proficiencies for touching death. Really weird with your brain. But you get other benefits, like you get advantage on saving throws against disease, poisoned, and you have resistance to poison damage. You get advantage on death saving throws. You don't have to eat, drink, or breathe anymore. You don't need to sleep. Magic can't put you to sleep. You get the elf ability to long rest in 4 hours. And then you get the benefits of when you make an ability check that uses a skill, you can roll a d6 after seeing the number on the d20 and add it to it.
So you get like
You
a
use
pseudo lucky, like almost a self-bardic inspiration.
It's a self-bardic inspiration, and
That's awesome.
you can only use it your proficiency bonus number of
That's
times
awesome.
per long rest. But the idea is that like your past life
That's-
is like, yo, I got you, bud.
That's AU material right there. That's
It
awesome.
would have been so cool to have Clarion walking around with that species.
I'm just gonna say,
I didn't
Like-
even know that
like the-
existed.
the
He
entire
has-
mission we're going to a bad place to do
well, I
a
was gonna
bad
say,
thing.
yeah. Even if, hypothetically, the future module, which is trying to get a magic item that can resurrect Clarion now, he has been raised as an undead, which usually makes either the lower level spells just straight impossible, and the higher level spells have a potential. I don't think one of them in 5e has like a potential of not working if you were previously an undead. So maybe he
wow.
does come back a little changed.
Yeah, there's a possibility. I would
It's
think
still
that.
there.
I
be
was definitely
interesting.
thinking, if anything,
If
like there has got to be something that's going to be very fundamentally changed in Clarion because of
there
his experience.
if you all go the way I think you will in future games, and this is kind of a peek behind the curtain for folks, I expect there to be a very hard conversation with Clarion, and I think it needs to be a really hard conversation rather than it's all forgiven. I know it wasn't all, maybe I
fixed
shouldn't have
now,
been
it's
there in the
fixed.
first place kind of thing. Like, because especially because of being raised as an undead, like that would make Clarion kind of pissed off, at least in some way. We'll talk about that more, but there's going to be it's going to be, if this goes the way I think it's going to go, there'll be some really great role play in store with Clarion.
Well, and I loved having because there was that initial like, wait, don't do that, it might make things magically more difficult, Lore does it anyway. But then later at the campfire with Kretha, Charlotte and Lore got to talk a bit more about it too, and how Charlotte expressed to Lore how, you know, if she could ask Lore a favor of if I die down here, don't do that to me. Like, I understand, like, the practical reasons of bringing in undead. It can carry itself. It could potentially help us in a fight and prevent anyone else from dying by being another body on the field. But how Charlotte, you know, was there as this all happened, realized her own feelings about it, and told Lore, don't do that to me.
Well, and I mean, being undead, being raised like that wasn't Clarion. Clarion was not there. That was a body being animated by magic, and that was it. And that is very, in many respects, violating, which of course is kind of a thing that Clarion himself is going to have to deal with.
The fact that he was actively doing,
because he was actively doing that. he was actively doing that for quite a while. So yeah, this is
to a person of a lower class than him. That worked
the butler.
It's a lot more fucked up looking at it from the other side, huh?
How do you feel, like, you freaking colonists?
I feel less bad, but as we said, Calder is like 2/3 a villain.
Well, yeah, but even Calder, when you know, we were setting up that campfire around where Kretha was and talking about it, and Lore was referring to the animated body as Clarion. I remember Calder saying a few times, that thing is not Clarion.
Yeah.
That's because Calder kind of objectively thinks about, like, how he justifies necromancy is the thing you're bringing back isn't the thing that died. It's just you're putting a new pilot in a meat robot. So, like, so he doesn't think of that as the same person at all. He also is aware of the very pragmatic issues of resurrecting something that's become an undead. And so he was a great deal pissed, like, thanks! You've just made a hard task that much harder.
Speaking of which, Meat Robot is now Clarion's new band from the...
I was about to say, perfect band name. Absolutely fantastic.
Well, and I loved as a character choice, too, that Lore blew the whistle. And that Lore was like, no, this is helping fix things. This is a short-term solution to a long-term problem. And I loved that aspect of, you know, starting the grieving process. It's been like an hour since Clarion died. Of course, Lore isn't going to be thinking, like, you know, as clearly as possible, but at all of the long-reaching consequences of every single action. I loved seeing Lore shut down, Lore starting to grieve, Lore starting, you know, heavily into the denial, bargaining, that sort of thing. It was really great role play.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Thank you.
I agree entirely.
I feel like it got shut down faster than I would have liked it to. Like,
I was surprised when the next morning you had Lore go and cut Clarion down and clean him down to the bones and put that in the bag.
I was pretty surprised too.
Yeah,
same. I thought Lore would dig her heels in and be like, no, this is the practical thing to do.
So we talked about this, like, out of game and stuff, but that I think that was partially like the bleed, where the bleed might have started.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there was no other option.
For folks who are viewers who might not be familiar with the term bleed, in games like this, and games that are maybe even more intense because they're more sort of live action rather than rolling dice, a lot of the time it can be very easy for your feelings and your character's feelings to begin to kind of blur together a little bit. Sometimes in one direction, sometimes in the other direction, sometimes kind of both. And oftentimes both, and we call that bleed. Bleed is when it becomes a little bit difficult, and it happens to everybody, if you're playing games that are getting you decently invested, where it becomes a little bit difficult to separate what is it that you're feeling and what is it your character's feeling. Anyone who has played a D&D character for a year or more only to have them either die or have to retire knows exactly what I'm talking about, because you feel that. You feel when it's time for that character to go off and make their own stories, and it's not a great feeling. So bleed happens to everybody to various degrees, but in a game like this one that has been particularly emotionally intense, especially surrounding Clarion's death, it's very normal for those feelings to bleed over.
And bleed is also, in some situations, both a trauma response and a trauma.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, carrying on from that point, the decision to make Calder carry the bones was also an interesting one that I liked, especially because later we ended up mirroring that when Calder was asking for even just a tiniest bit of bone and was denied it. So I think like that was an interesting turnabout later in the campaign.
I ought to try to cut those together into a single clip if I can. That would be a nice little juxtaposition. Yeah.
Yeah, because Lore was making Calder carry it because Lore was blaming Calder for the death. And it was one of those, like, carry your sins.
Yes, I recall specifically that Calder made the tactically sound but maybe not most courageous choice to drop a sphere of darkness around the around himself when the Roper was doing its thing, and as a result of that, both he and Charlotte managed to avoid subsequent attacks because of the disadvantage. It ended up being a tactically sound choice, but again, like, to someone as straightforward as Lore, it doesn't necessarily come across as anything other than cowardice.
Yeah, which is what came up during that big argument in the fight, and Calder's response to it was, "I could have left. I didn't."
Yeah, it was super tense moment, and it kept being tense. Like, there was at the fight, there was at the campfire afterwards, there was the next morning when suddenly Clarion is a bag of bones, and like,
that tension between Lore and Calder really did we carried that with them for the rest of the dungeon, and
which makes sense because it was only like 2 days later.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Like it wasn't until that it was not until they got out of at the very end when we finally have that camp scene after all of this said and done, that both of them kind of relaxed and stopped sniping at each other because they had just gotten through that horrible experience, and they kind of like tacitly agreed on some unspoken level to not backbite like that. It would have been very easy for them to slide back into that, and they didn't. So
it was actually very interesting and difficult to beat Creetha in that situation.
I was just about to ask, please say more.
Ask and react, to basically act and react, not as Clarion to a situation that is so very, really Clarion based in many respects, because like, you know, they were sniping from the beginning and there was definitely issues, but this was the giant flame that lit the bonfire, and like Creetha was not part of any of it, and Creetha is coming in to this party with, you know, this such obvious and very difficult tension. You know, I can't imagine, you know, trying to easily slide yourself into that. And so I had to treat it with such like I had to be so removed from it.
While dealing with her own trauma, Creetha having lost her own band of goblin adventuring friends.
Creetha's own trauma and my bleed from Clarion's death.
Yeah.
Because I was still experiencing that.
Of course you were.
Pretty constantly, especially at that early time.
And
the more that they fought, and the more
Mm-hmm.
that his death was such a shadow over things, the more bleed I kind of experienced about that.
And it didn't help that at that time we ended up having some scheduling issues and some technical issues, if I recall properly. Like,
Yeah.
it was a while before we even got to the lost episode. We had to delay it at least once. And yeah, it was definitely like a long time coming. And that was even like, you haven't even gotten back up to the Glitterham yet, right? This whole conversation
It's
in the
all
stairs
down,
was literally
yeah.
like in the stairs on the way up, and trying to sort of deal with the consequences of this death. I'm gonna jump us back over to the map.
Okay.
And so you came up out of the Roper Den, haggard and worn, and into this sort of very algae-filled area, Area 25. And there really isn't anything here, although again, there's an entrance to the troglodytes if that's the way you went, but that's not the way you went.
Yeah, I sent Swoops to do like a circling, like he noticed the scent of troglodytes, but then we never ran into any, so it didn't end up becoming a thing.
Right.
And then Charlotte got to be a history major, and we explored the burial spot.
That's right. So you headed up these stairs, and again, here in Area 23, I was worried you were going to miss this area entirely because of the way you kind of entered. And I liked Charlotte's fascination. I also liked how Creetha, again, like, had a reaction to being in this place. Goblins don't like orcs either. Goblins may not like dwarves, but like, there's still the whole enemy of my enemy thing happening here.
Yeah.
There was
Although,
more
to be
to
fair,
it, right? You
They
asked
were
about
both
names.
her favorite enemies.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
And
Enemy of
Creetha-
my enemy is also my fucking enemy.
It can
Yeah.
be, yes.
Well, and Creetha was also the new addition to the party who spoke Dwarvish. Before then, it was just it was just Charlotte. So like, they kind of got to bond a little bit over that.
Because Creetha speaks both the languages of her enemy.
Charlotte is lucky that dwarven runes are so stark and often easy to feel. Like,
Well, that was the reasoning, character creation wise, why she would know Dwarven, is that she first learned how to like feel kind of like Braille, read Dwarven runes, and from there, she uses Dwarven runes to dictate things that are, even if she's like in a lecture hall hearing something in common, she'll dictate it in Dwarven runes in like wax or clay, so that she can feel it later. Like.
Yeah.
That was an early character decision that I was so glad actually paid off.
there were some interpersonal notes as well in this, not encounter, but in this Area 23, right? There were some interactions, if I recall. I know Creetha specifically saying, "Are you gonna rob this area?" Which we talked about
fair.
a second ago.
I like how it was a tiny bit of foreshadowing, because once we find Durgan, Charlotte does
Someone
steal
steals
something
his goddamn glove.
There was justification, but I liked this was turned out to be foreshadowing.
And then so at this time, and I want folks sitting at home to sort of realize, if you're like watching this on YouTube later, this was months and months in the making, and at this point, I knew that players were there were some emotions running high. There were some really rough times that just happened. So as they're up here having this peaceful moment, I immediately begin, boom, boom. Like, there is now suddenly a battering ram happening over at that iron door that you saw before. And just
this was an added encounter, right?
This was an added encounter, yes. Not only was it added, but it was a like proportionally too difficult for your level, but I knew it wouldn't be too difficult for your level because we had two arcane primary casters that just hit 5th level, and I knew that you would want to blow off some fucking steam. Like,
You're not wrong.
after the fight with the Roper, which was a win but felt like a loss, after all of the sort of interpersonal drama, after all of the sort of meditative Zen aspect of being in a dwarven burial ground, I figured that what you needed was some goddamn carnage.
This is where Kreitha realized that she was with people who were out of her league.
Who were dangerous, yes.
They were, yeah.
Because
this is where she realized how they survived the Roper. Because in my head canon, there weren't any mages in her group because there weren't that many mages from where she's from.
Totally. And like I mean, archers at the end game are probably the best damage dealers in the game. Like, more so than mages. But, like, at this point, the moment you hit level 5, you've got Lightning Bolt and Fireball. Suddenly, you're doing 3 times the damage that Kreitha can do on a shot, and you're doing it in an area. And I remember specifically that right after the fact, you specifically said something along the lines of, "You all are scary."
Yes, I did. I had Kreitha say something like that because she was very intimidated. She understood then why, 1, they were sent in, and 2, how they managed to survive something that she barely managed to survive as the only party member that did. And I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure how she managed to survive. There was probably running and cowardice involved.
Possibly.
A, goblin. B, archer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you would have been back. Yeah.
Jeff, why don't you give us a brief description? So if I recall properly, up here on this ledge, there were some orc archers that were just beginning to take aim at you, and there were a couple of others that were climbing up that cliff. And you decided to make use of your new spells with a metamagic twist. And I would love for you to describe for me what it is that you did in that moment.
I love metamagic. It's been one of my favorite mechanics ever since 3rd ed. And I have a soft spot for sorcerers, and so the fact that the sorcerers get like exclusive metamagic in 5th ed was a huge like selling point to me. So and then Tasha's had just recently come out at the time, and it included the brand new shiny transmutation feature of transmute spell, changing damage types, and so there's a lot of really fun. It doesn't change the mechanics of that spell at all. So if I wanted to put like a fire frostbite, and it would just operate the exact same regardless of that flavor being like 180% in the wrong direction.
It doesn't catch things on fire, it catches them on frostbite.
Firebite.
Yeah. Yeah, so like I loved the idea of like casting fireball but changing the damage type. So I was just going down like the various elemental types. It's like, oh, ice ball. Oh, it's like, oh, lightning ball. And then I got to acid. I'm like, what the hell is an acid ball? Because unlike those are all like energy types. Those are all like, one saps all kinetic energy, one creates too much kinetic energy.
I remember you specifically said that when you went to cast the spell. You specifically said, "You know, I don't know what an acid ball is, but I think we're about to find out."
And so, like because the fire, like one of the things, like a fireball isn't an explosion. It's described. It creates an area of space that is just full of damage.
It is now fire,
and it emanates from a specific point. So, so the idea of just taking a spherical observable area of space and turning it full of sulfuric acid sounded particularly horrifying to me.
If I recall properly, the orcs were able to just barely half gasp in surprise before they were skeletonized, and then the skeletons dissolved, as well as the entire rock face of that little cliff there.
It's okay. Screw that cliff. I have a grudge against that. I had a grudge against that cliff.
It's the reason you ended up in the Roper lair. It's its fault.
It knew what it did. So, like just being able to hit and there's something that will never be taken away by for sorcerers and spellcasters, especially once you unlock these higher damage spells. Of just it is the magical make enemy go away button.
I like status effects, but the best status effect is dead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to argue with that one.
Speaking of giant
Stem's
piles of
pretty nice.
D6s,
Oh yes.
Gail, I would love for you to tell me a little bit about your role in this, and specifically taking advantage of how the enemies were arranged.
So, battering ram at the door. Battering rams work by having 2 lines of people on either side of the ram swinging it towards the door. When we were approaching, we specifically said we were going to wait until they actually bust through the door so that they do the work for us. And Charlotte lined herself up about 95 feet back from the door and
And did a lightning bolt.
did a lightning bolt, which you don't need to see the target to be able to cast lightning bolt.
No,
which is
you
why I went
literally just need to say it's a line in front of me.
in this direction. Yeah.
And you had
And it
swoops
was
feeding
even-
you information about where the enemies were.
Yeah. Well, it was even because I remember Kretha went invisible as we approached stealthily, and I remember like shooting off a message to Kretha being like, "Don't stand in front of me." Just like, be aware. Don't stand any amount of distance in front of me. Because this was the first time Charlotte got to cast Lightning Bolt. She cast it, killed everybody in that line because they all failed their saves. Took 2 steps over and said in Orcish, because she could, to the other people, "Make your prayers now," and then cast another one. It was very cathartic.
I'm pretty sure you killed like 5 orcs just by yourself with those 2. Maybe it was more like 7. I don't even remember. It was a lot of orcs.
We don't have the
Because-
footage for that.
Because the orcs
And it
were...
hot
Too
like,
awesome. That's why it's
caught
gone.
the battering ram on fire, you said? Yeah.
Yeah, and because orcs only have 5 HP, like, this encounter
Oh,
was
yeah.
made for you to just, like...
This
Yeah.
man was made for you and
I was gonna say, while we were all tearing through these paper-thin orcs, comparatively, Lore was hacking and slashing at the only real threat in this fight.
They brought a cave troll, yes. Yes, they did. And
where
that,
was the cave troll?
and
Where
that,
did it come from? It wasn't upstairs.
that was
Paul
a
brought
reference.
it, of course.
That was a reference that I made, and then I mentioned that I made it, and then one of you was like, everyone knew you made that reference, and now I am referencing the time in the lost session when anyway, moving right along. It was a meta squared reference, and
It was a long walk, and then some hobbits
Did
threw a ring
you
into a
notice how
volcano.
I didn't ruin your fun this time? Did you
Well,
notice?
well,
I
until
noticed I
just
didn't
now.
ruin it.
Well, but I was gonna say, like, it was kind of very poetic that Lore got to use her new, flaming blade against a troll.
Yes, and
Yeah, it
that
was good.
is where we come to you, because yes, while everyone else was dealing massive AoE damage, the one creature that actually had like a decent CR, you were squaring up against with a flaming weapon, which is just the best thing to have against a troll.
Yeah, basically, I did that.
And I recall you like the thing about a flaming weapon, of course, is that it takes away the troll's ability to regenerate. And
Well,
I
I was also casting green flame blade every time, basically.
Yes.
Which, the fact that I use green flame blade so often means I actually don't need to have a second attack, because green flame blade is an action and therefore takes away the second attack I get. So
Zagreus,
there's some mechanical things I would have changed. That's what I'm saying.
acid ball is worse only because of the description.
It's because when you think about acid ball, you think about corrosive, delicious flavors.
I think
and-
about like a drink or something.
Tide Pods.
Tide Pods.
Oh God.
Think
Moving
about
ro-
Tide
I'm so
Pods,
sorry about that.
and then you think acid, bad in mouth. No thanks.
It gets even worse when you realize, because it just says you can it emanates from a specific point. There's in the description, doesn't it say anything about it? Just you designate the space. So if you designate the area where it begins of the inside of a dude's mouth, it doesn't change the mechanics of the spell at all. It's just all the more horrifying.
Yeah, it's
from-
just
that's
from a narrative
descriptively
perspective.
much worse.
I don't think it goes around corners though.
Yeah, I think you technically need to be able to see the point of
Yeah, you
origin,
do-
which is
you-
why I
you-
took
you-
lightning bolt instead of fireball.
You do
So
need
I'm
to
guessing
designate.
he needs to be screaming for you to see the inside of mouth.
I'm just
Okay.
saying it. I'm just saying it's an orc, and if I orc, and I can make an approximation of its mouth.
Probably, yes.
So kick it in the knee, then
Yes.
Or just let it start talking or roaring.
So we cathartically got through the door and then had a run-in with an NPC that was having about the same reaction Kretha was having.
Yes. So before we go to before we go to the foundry, there was a little bit of a sort of wrapping up encounter where you all, because part of the encounter, a drow, which I believe killed Swoops.
Mm-hmm.
Was that in that encounter? Or was
Twice.
that previously?
Previous, when we were first in the Glitterhame.
Okay.
Twice.
Because so here's the thing. I built a Gloomstalker Ranger specifically to sort of tail you all and maybe try to swipe any treasure or take control of the forge if possible. And as a Gloomstalker Ranger, he was uniquely equipped to deal with all of you because you had no light sources. Everyone either had swoops to tell them where to go or dark vision, and Gloomstalker Rangers specifically are invisible when you try to perceive them with dark vision.
with only dark vision.
At which point, like at some point earlier on, and we didn't talk about this, but Calder took a swipe with a knife because he knew that like this guy was right in front of him, but he was invisible. And so in this one, he actually came out and said, "Oh, hey, wow, that was a whole lot of acid and lightning damage y'all just did. I have decided not to fuck with you. Would you like a place to rest so that I can get the fuck out and tell my bosses that I don't want to deal with lightning acid people?"
Yeah, I think we threatened his life.
You
Charlotte
threatened
tried
his
to
life
flirt with
legitimately just by dismantling the orcs the way that you did. He had a
I
similar
feel like I
response
pointed
that
an
Kretha
orc
had.
head at the guy.
And he gave us
And I
his orc
told it-
hands.
He did. That's true. Too bad the guy that went to, spoiler alert, but too bad the guy that was going to pay you for those orc hands did not survive. And thus,
Was that part of the module or was that made up?
no, everything
I think
after the town, everything other than the one paragraph describing it was made up.
So you put that in there like that was made up.
I felt like if there was a human/dwarven town in an area that the orcs were invading, the first thing they would do is go in and sack that town. So yes, I made that choice, and I felt like it was appropriate given what was going on.
Sorry, I interrupted you when you were talking about interacting with the drow.
Yeah. So the drow offered you a place to stay, if I recall properly. He offered you like he cast the rope trick spell, which is an excellent spell and something that Kretha might want to consider taking into account, because basically it takes a rope and allows you to climb up into an extra dimensional space where you can stay for a little bit. There was a comedic moment where Charlotte barely, sort of slightly mistimed the end of the spell, so fell on her ass instead of like backflipping like Lore did and landing perfectly.
Ta-da.
And then we went into the
Charlotte.
foundry, yeah?
Yep. Climbed up some stairs. There was a trap.
Yes, there was a trap. The trap was right here. It was yet another angry dwarf trap. This time, I think you all played into it deliberately because you knew the trap was there. Every
They
single
played
one
into
of
it
you.
deliberately.
Yes.
Well, so we knew that the trap was there, but we did not know what the trigger was.
That's true.
Yes.
Okay.
So what happened was
So because Rob, I distinctly remember this because I remember all interactions that are somewhat negative.
happened was that you can't see it.
We can't see that. Nope, it's
Damn
gone
it.
forever.
Damn it! If it only was black and white.
Turn it sideways.
I
It doesn't
love
seem
that
to
you're
notice
coloring it.
sideways. We figured out what the trap was because like the trap was like, oh, it's probably the most obvious thing in the world. And it's like, yeah, it was okay. But then there's some doors, and they're like, oh, cool. There's some traps, sure, fine. But we couldn't figure out if it was like a pressure plate or what. So
Yup.
then we were like, well, we'll open the door then. We
Kretha
opened
was
the
trying
door
to
and
climb
it's
up
clean.
to discover it, and they opened the door.
And it
Kretha
just so
was
happened
on
that
the
opening the door was the trigger. Yes.
was the trigger.
But there
and
was no
Kretha
obvious trigger. So
was literally swinging with the actual trap. That was fun.
While Charlotte and Meepo waited outside the room. Charlotte got burned once. She wasn't going to get burned twice.
Literally.
she got better.
And yes, as you can see, there's the secret door off to the east here, which you found like pretty quickly after that. Yeah, it was. I mean, and this trap was never a danger to you, right? At this point, it was kind of a moment of comedy relief almost.
Yeah.
And
then we get to our first Durger encounter.
And then
Yes.
yeah, so
Then it got weird.
this is
That
the
is a
part
name that's impossible to pronounce.
This is the part, yeah, Durger or Dwerger or Durgar.
Durger, I think, is it's they
Durgar.
back their head against the keyboard to come up
So-
with that fucking name.
So this area, I'm gonna go ahead and read the encounter really quick.
Ooh,
So
that picture.
it's this enormous hall is lined with 10 great pillars, blah blah blah. Suddenly a harsh voice calls from the shadows of the pillars, go back the way you came, this is the only warning you'll get. And you fight against some Grey Dwarves. Yeah.
We didn't fight them right away though. We tried.
No. And that's
We
the
tried.
thing.
Oh,
Appar-
Kretha wanted to. Kretha was fighting.
That's
Apparently,
true. I was
word.
getting consistently misgendered as an it.
Yes. So that was the first thing. So they came out and they said, this is our turf, basically. Fuck you guys. And also fuck that thing that you brought with you. Because Grey Dwarves, in these particular Grey Dwarves, were just so racist against goblins. Just so racist. Like they're
And it
not
was
so
even
much racist.
they're not even sapient kind of racist.
It was very unfortunate that the goblin could hear what they were saying.
And it was very unfortunate.
Understand Dwarven.
It was very unfortunate because the very short combat that ensued was incredibly one-sided. Like, y'all just came back from a 95 HP armor class 19 roper. Yeah, sure, they can turn invisible, these Dwerger, they can grow and like become larger, but if I recall properly, the one that kept calling Kretha it kind of ended the combat when Kretha's spear was right up against that big old carotid artery right there. Saying, you'd better goddamn say my name with some respect, you piece of shit. If I recall properly, I think it was something like that.
Yeah, I thought this was a really great example of we tried diplomacy. They weren't intimidated enough by us to consider talking to us. Very short, like 2 rounds of combat in which a lot of damage was dealt on our side and almost none was taken.
Oh, man.
And then, you know, I spent Charlotte's action, like,
You were grappling.
debuffing Kretha, standing in the way, and, like, begging the Dwergar to back down. And that only worked because you guys were so, like, Kretha was so ruthlessly effective in combat that they're like, okay, maybe we should back down.
And in fact,
like,
this
it
was a moment.
Weird
This was a
combat
moment.
diplomacy.
This was a moment when Calder showed himself as an incredible utilitarian sorcerer as well, because you made use of a very common and very powerful combo of twin spell plus haste.
Yeah.
And in fact, I believe you selectively ended the haste on Kretha because she was about to just not deal with any
I
kind
did.
of negotiation.
Gale used Dispel Magic.
Yeah, it
Oh,
was the
right.
tiniest bit of PvP. Right,
Yep.
dispelled Kretha.
Dispelled and then grappled. That was really the first time that we had that actually happen in our
No, it
games
wasn't.
entirely, wasn't it?
It wasn't grapple. I was taking the aid action towards the Dwergar to give you disadvantage on attacking.
When did I get grappled though? Because remember there was a point where Rob was like, "Is it okay if you have the right to say no, I'm not going to be grappled because we're not rolling.
No, that it was the dispel.
I think that was
Because
the
it would-
dispel that I gave
because-
you the option, because I don't
when
like
haste ends,
dice being
yeah.
rolled between player characters if it can be avoided.
Yeah, and when haste ends, you are exhausted.
You're exhausted
for
for one round.
So that was you weren't grappled, you were exhausted for a turn. It was I think like
Yes,
I
Am I
that's what it was.
hallucinating the grapple, or was that later in the?
I think I think that the grapple was like planned, and you were because Gail was considering to try and like physically stop you.
That might be what it is. I'm
and
not
then
hallucinating it. I'm just imagining that.
If
it
only we had
actually
some
happened.
footage.
Yeah, if only.
If only we had some beautiful
Rob.
bean footage. I know.
But I loved that. Tried diplomacy, it failed. Tried combat, it was working a little too well, and thus the diplomacy was able to succeed in the end.
That's something I want to mention here, because this is, module speaking, the first chance for diplomacy that you have had really, realistically, the whole module. Right?
Yeah.
The whole interactions with the mayor and everything, I made that shit up. The whole interactions with, like, the drow, I totally made up. As written, this module has been combat from beginning until end, until you suddenly have a chance to maybe ask these Grey Dwarves to maybe possibly negotiate with you. And that's, I think, a weakness of this module. It's one of the reasons why, like you said before, I included other adventuring parties, because I know that you all really like trying to resolve conflict through social interaction first, combat second, and there isn't a whole lot of room for that in the first half of this whole module. I mean, think about it. You had orcs that are not going to negotiate. You had troglodytes that are probably not going to negotiate. You had a roper that absolutely wasn't going to negotiate. You had gricks and fucking sturges that aren't intelligent enough to negotiate. It has been nothing but hack and slash combat, and that seems a little bit weird to me for a 3rd edition module. That feels like more of a 1st edition module kind of thing. There hasn't really been any chance for diplomacy at all.
I have to disagree. Like 3rd ed was full of combat after combat after combat.
Fair
material.
enough.
It wasn't really until like the later half of 3rd ed and into like 3.5 era and into the and into 5th ed and into 5th ed where they really like started acknowledging that, oh, maybe role playing is actually a part of this game.
This is
so
yeah.
Because look at 4th ed when they actually committed to doing 100% combat. It's a fine game for what it is. It's just not this.
No, it's not what we've been doing. Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I think we're going to possibly move away from the Yawning Portal sort of mini things, because going forward, we're going to have more and more modules that are from 1st edition that are just lethal traps and horrible combat encounters as far as the eye can see.
If the words
it works for the right group, but I don't think this is the group for that.
If the words Tomb of Annihilation ever get proposed as a place to go, I'm just leaving.
At least you know.
And I think, but I think, us successfully threatening, talking with, they gave us a map of the whole fucking place.
Yeah, they were
like,
really
that's
helpful.
where the lost episode ended, right? Was us getting the map.
Yeah.
They gave you more information than I intended them to give you, because if I recall properly, you did very well on your intimidation checks. Even irrespective of the fact that you had them at knife point, I seem to remember you doing very well on your checks. So they gave you more information than they intended to, more information than I intended to expose at this point, including the fact that there's a dragon down there.
Yes.
As I recall, my last action in the combat was it was trying to respect Charlotte by just going, if you keep going, we will just kill you. Like, it did not a fight, not a defeat. You're just going to die.
It's just going to be a murder, yeah.
And they wouldn't let me do the murder, which was a problem for me personally, a person who wanted to do a murder.
And this area ended up being kind of your pseudo base of operations for a bit.
Essentially for the rest of the module, yeah.
I
This in the
admitted
cathedral.
this
Yeah.
is the second time when I threw some railroad tracks down. Although Jen tells me that I needn't have bothered because she would have done it if I hadn't.
Oh yeah.
I went to that door intending to eventually open it after a nap.
Now we are past the lost episode at this point. The next one began with Charlotte and Lore eating Grick at the fire, and
Seafood,
and
kinda.
Meepo just barging his way into the this cathedral here, this little sort of chapel, and there was a bit of a fight. I took away
went
one of the enemies. There were supposed to be 2 ogre skeletons and 1 orc champion. I took away one of the ogre skeletons because half the party was still talking over Grick,
Yep.
and only half the party was dealing with this. So I felt like it was not fair to throw a whole encounter at you, especially
I
since
think
you
we would've
didn't
been
choose to start it.
I think we would have been fine even with 2 ogre skeletons, because at no point did I feel that the ogre skeleton or the champion were a threat.
Fair enough.
champion
Sometimes
was a
I
wight.
over-engineer things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also remember that like y'all ended it in like 2 rounds. Like it was
wasn't-
real quick.
Meepo was a star tank on that one, if I recall properly. Like he was holding off both of them for a bit.
Remember
also-
to smite.
I remember to smite Kreetha. I remember Kreetha critted in a really significant way.
That's right. Kreetha was fantastic in this combat.
And I managed again. It was just again Frostbite putting in work, and every one of their attacks just did nothing.
Yeah.
And all of our attacks were just like taking giant chunks of their health until they fell over.
My favorite part of that was at the end where Calder's like going to yell at Meepo for opening the door, and Kreetha's over there looting and being like, "The other 2 don't need to know about this, right?"
And like I also
Basically.
I do also remember getting like really ready to like tear into Meepo, and then you're like, and it's like, and then like looking at Meepo just like, oh, I can't stay mad at you.
And I really remember like Kreetha going, no, we fought, so we get the loot, right? They did their thing. They're over there.
Jen,
We're over
you're muted.
here. The loot's over here. The loot's ours, right? That's the way it works. And
That's how
Calder
goblins
was
think.
having absolutely none of it.
Like Calder just like saying, that's no, it's not how this will work.
Jen, you're muted.
Or you're quiet.
Oh,
you're
no.
Muted. It says mute in the corner.
How?
There you
There
are.
you
I
go.
can hear you now.
No.
Oh, how did I do that? I must have accidentally pressed a button that was weird.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
Somehow,
Yes.
somehow mute is hotkeyed to something, but it's a mystery.
But I don't know what.
It's a mystery.
And it's meat, so God only knows what.
According to the overlay, it says to me that it's Control D that turns off the mic.
I did not hit Control D. That's like a little bit more complex than like an elbow. Whatever.
Anyway.
But yeah, the like it was like one of the first like social interactions, and also like I'll note now, Calder also, while he consciously like put Kreetha to task about like, no, we're not going to steal from the party. We're all here. We all reap the rewards. That's the idea of it. I also pointedly didn't tell anybody else that Kreetha tried to rob us.
I also want to note from a game design perspective, it's another combat encounter with no possibility of any other resolution.
See also the furniture, but that happens later.
Two things.
like-
One,
Yeah.
Kistrel had us hydrate, so let's do that.
Oh no, I'm out.
Secondly, Nathaniel, welcome. Glad you're here. We're talking about Forge of Fury.
But yeah, so as far as all of the encounters in here go, either we're fighting undead or animated things, or the Dwergar.
Yeah.
So we do
Speaking
have, yeah.
of animated things, let's go ahead and move over to the kitchen just for a moment. It was a later encounter, but fighting the animated table I thought was a really important bit of comedy relief again, because you know there was a lot of heavy stuff on that in that previous like interaction between characters.
Meanwhile, poor Kretha is just like, tables can be animated?
This is not the first animated object that the team dealt with, right? In fact, this is the third.
No.
But it was Kretha. But it was Kretha's first without a dwarf writing in her head.
First conscious for it, pretty much. Yeah. So
this is set up as just kind of a. I assume it's here as yet another combat encounter, like. So there is a dwarven wizard who lived in this area called Andoril, and one of the things that he did is he animated certain objects, including this table, a rug, and some suits of armor, all of which form combat encounters. Now, we used these almost as a pacing tool, like there would be a very short, very easy combat that you would boom, boom, boom get through, and then we would move on to the next bit of plot, so I think it worked well in that way. But again,
from a production perspective, it did like frustrate us as myself as a player because it was just okay, a fight, yay, time for an easy encounter with no reward on the other end of it.
And that's kind of why I included, and we're going to get to this in a moment, as I've been saying this whole stream, Kretha getting possessed by the dwarf wizard who had the password, right? And out of character during this fight against the table, Gale specifically was like, there's a password, right? And we learned about it. We know about it. Oh, no, that was in character.
It was because Charlotte and Meepo were still back in the cathedral, and when it came to my turn in initiative, Charlotte was still doing her ritual, being like, I sure hope they remember that there's a password to things. And then we went back.
That's right, you were summoning Scoots.
It was right there to Calder next in initiative, who just was, I don't want to say anything to this thing. I don't want to dignify it. I just want this table dead.
Yeah.
Well, Kretha was no longer possessed, and why would she know?
She wasn't quite here.
The tables who were like animated would have passwords. None of that made any sense to her at all. It was just completely nonsensical.
We should definitely run a thing with Kretha and Calder of them on the road, and he's and talking about what other stupid magic crap is out there.
Just because you've been possessed by a wizard doesn't mean you understand how they think.
True.
No.
Who does?
Me and Andrew, didn't really talk about him being a wizard that much. That wasn't really the crux of our conversations.
Speaking of being possessed,
really depressed.
This area here, so the ghost encounter. Let me jump in for a second. Let's see. The ghost relentlessly attacks anyone who enters its territory, but can't pursue characters who retreat beyond its domain. If the ghost is turned, like turn undead, it flees to one of the empty rooms, blah, blah, blah. Arundel's ghost is tormented by grief and shame over abandoning his kin to die. See Area 47, blah, blah, blah. The spirit might be laid to rest if the characters can convince it that they have cleared Kundrakar. So, this was intended to be another potentially social encounter, and you all rose to the fucking occasion.
Well, I was gonna ask you, because the only people Arundel tried to possess was first Charlotte and then Kretha. Were you purposely aiming for the ones who spoke Dwarven, or was that just
try Meepo at
luck of the dice?
I think it avoided Meepo because Meepo's a paladin, and paladins exude a certain energy, and ghosts know that possessing a paladin is often a bad idea. I think that's what I said. I'd have to go back and look at the the footage, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how it went. And he passed through Stinky as well, but Stinky is only sort of a sapient being. He's kind of more of an elemental than an actual creature. But I thought it was really, really interesting that you were the one that he ended up possessing, and that you were willing to talk. You could have probably made the save and expelled him, and you probably would have killed him, and it would have been the end of that. But instead, this goblin who hates dwarves, and this dwarf who, like most dwarves, hates goblins, ended up becoming becoming symbiotic for a short amount of time, and I really liked that. Like, I didn't plan that shit. It just so happened that you were in a space where he might be able to go, and you specifically said, "I will accept the possession," as opposed to, "I'm going to make my save."
Yeah.
I like that entire chain. I also I remember thinking at the time that was a case of Jen being a nicer person than Kreitha probably was at that moment,
Possibly.
and then as a result of that in character decision, transformed Kreitha, like not much obviously, because it was still like there's the old adage that when we play these RPGs we're playing ourselves at different volumes.
Yeah.
And so Kreitha, like, it clearly hates dwarves, probably still has a chip on her shoulder towards dwarves even after this incident, but now but we have deliberately shoulder checked some empathy into that. So
Well, and I kind of I was coming at it from the idea that Kreitha, things were getting increasingly difficult as we go along party-wise.
Yeah.
Like, we had just dealt with the whole thing where Lore and Charlotte had left and then wound up coming back, and a bunch of other stuff had happened. And I think that, like, okay, there's not too many ghosts that Kreitha had come in contact with, and I just think she was taken off guard. And you know, there is Kreitha is very neutral. She can be both a good person and a bad person. And I think that there's something to be said for, I mean, because that was a lot of grief and, like, despair.
Both firsthand and secondhand.
Both firsthand and secondhand. So, it's kind of hard to overlook that.
Totally.
And I don't think that Kreitha could have managed to overlook that in that moment, regardless of whether it was a dwarf or an orc or really anybody, like her worst enemy. I think she would have been compelled to at least try and do something, because it was
like
just
that.
so much.
Yeah.
I like it and even prefer that, because so much of Faerun is a fascinating place. It is, however, written in the 90s, and it shows.
Yeah.
Very much so.
And so one of its main persistent themes that kind of defies reason after you look at it long enough is the persistent themes of racism that are of, like, ancestral enemies that keep cropping up. And that's been a thing that we've all criticized, and we are all deliberately trying to directly
in
engage.
character, you have addressed it a couple of times.
And like, even though we're all playing nobles, and we are playing up those noble aspects at times, like, we look at the concept of racism within Faerun with the uniform descent of, well, that's just stupid. Stop it.
Yes.
Well, and I also, man, I am a sucker for themes and parallels and through lines, and the fact that, like, Kreitha's introduction was that she was the only one who lived in her party from the Roper because she cut ties and ran, and then she meets Arundel, who's the only reason he survived to become a ghost later was that he cut ties and he ran.
Now,
then she was also the person that Calder was talking to about how Lore was accusing him of not doing enough because he stayed back in the fight, and just how they were bonding over that, and then she and the ghost were it was great.
It was a really great through line.
Like, trying to bond with Calder over his perceived cowardice, and yeah.
Oh man, I loved it.
Yeah, that was really good. So,
You doing okay, Em?
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Just doing a check-in, because I know that this whole area.
No, we're doing okay.
Yep. Okay.
I do appreciate you throwing in a scroll of water breathing in his drawers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, was that actually there? Let me take a
chest and
look.
drawers and stuff. I don't see it.
But regardless, like, this entire area is just.
I put it in there.
This is just a pile of encounter.
Yeah, it's a big pile and of mostly combat encounters, right? and it's mostly just it's a dungeon crawl, right? You're supposed to go through, open a room. Hey, there's some things attacking us. Defeat the things, loot the room, move on. I think we did a lot more with it than that, and I appreciate that a lot. Now,
I'm glad we did.
Here is a thing. So the rug was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I really like Stinky having to fight it while
Rugby Stinky was hilarious.
Yes, and Stinky having to fight it while Creetha is possessed by this ghost and not really caring about Stinky was amazing. Yeah, big fan of that. Sets of armor. I doubled the number of sets of armor to make a decent fight because if I recall properly, we needed a combat session that was a little bit meatier. There were 2. I made you fight 4. It was super easy. It was super fast. You got a little bit of armor out of it.
I appreciate you not throwing the succubus at us.
So that's where we're going to talk about next. So
there's a succubus encounter here?
Yes. Yes. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. In Arundel's, or in near Arundel's rule, there's Idala's den. Idala is a succubus who was trapped, bound by Arundel, and never released when he died.
Oh shit!
So you get to this tortured soul. You rescue her. She lays down a sympathetic line, and I don't know, maybe find some time alone with a particular player character who specifically says that he doesn't get physically touched often, and maybe does a thing there. And that was an option. In fact, I had conscripted Jonathan Fee to play that incubus, and that would have been a lot of fun. Unfortunately, he had some emergencies that happened around the area, and we had such a great social interaction with the ghost that I felt that the succubus would be redundant.
In fact, the succubus being present kind of undermines Arendel's character.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it does make some shitty.
Let's be real, kind of all wizards do some pretty fucking ethically murky shit to get whatever information or power or magic they want. Like, that's kind of part and parcel of being a wizard.
I'm not saying Charlotte's made a deal with the literal devil, but y'all never really found out what Swoops is.
Oh, man. And one of these days I'm going to spring Warmbow on you again, but...
No! Why would you do that?
I only want to ask Warmbow a question: is he a demon or a devil? And if he answers correctly,
I think he's a quasit, which I think was a demon. So I think he answers wrong.
Cool. Then he dies. It's right for me.
So I wrestled with cutting because I knew that Jonathan unfortunately wouldn't be able to join us because his husband was having a hard time and there was a lot happening there. But it was a villain that specifically would have been potentially able to kill another character. Yeah. It was a very dangerous character. It could have taken advantage of a specifically defined weakness of Calder's character. There could have been because she would have posed as a tiefling, and she would have talked about how everybody is so mean to her because she has a devil, not a demon parent. Who would be able to mistake a demon and a devil? And she would really play that up. And then she would have given you a bunch of lies about what's in the dungeon, which is another thing that could have worked or not. I don't know. And then she would have tried to kiss Calder to death. And it quite possibly would have worked, and I don't necessarily know that would have been a positive thing for the campaign.
Yeah. I don't think it would have added much to the story at that point.
I don't either. So I think removing the succubus was the good choice, and I would not have done it if you hadn't had such a powerful social interaction with the ghost. I felt like that sort of filled the niche that this was going for, and we could move on to dealing with the remaining Durger and going down into the Black Lake.
Yeah, we don't want to bog the game down with any frivolous combat encounters. So let's talk about a frivolous combat encounter.
Yeah.
So that was another combat encounter that, so once you were done in that area, you opened this secret door, and I gave you a shot at some more Dwerger who were coming back from giving some sort of tribute to the Black Dragon. And this is one of those times when I forgot to activate your voices, and because we didn't have any viewers at the time, nobody thought to say anything.
That's how it goes sometimes.
And y'all murdered the hell out of a few Dwerger.
Calder and Kretha.
Fair.
And
With literal shots in the dark.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
It's-
There was a murder happening.
we had a split-second decision. Every Durger we have met, the Durger we had met had been hostile, and we were specifically warned by the Durger we interrogated that any further Durger would fight to the death.
Yeah.
And we had no reason to doubt that. So I don't mind. I did not and still don't feel bad just killing a bunch of Durger that were crawling out of making an offering to a chaotic evil being.
I kind of agree with you. You didn't really see a whole lot of the Forge. You did walk in there and see it. I am making up everything about the Forge. I have decided in my campaign that the Forge of Fury is artifact level magic. There is nothing in the module about the Forge. It may as well be just a whole bunch of rusted metal as far as the module is concerned.
So literally the Forge of Fury doesn't matter. It's
not even a real MacGuffin. It's a fake MacGuffin.
No. The point of a MacGuffin is that it could be anything.
Yeah.
It's just a plot device.
Yes.
It's not actually important what it is.
There is historical precedence here, and there is like magical treasure down here. But this is just a treasure trove as far as the module is concerned. I injected all of the plot myself.
I still have my weird broken, could eventually be a magical sword if it got in the hands of someone who knew what they were doing.
Yes. I really like, by the way, making intelligent weapons and putting them in my game, especially ones that can speak. Gail, you know all about this. I had a sort of defective magical weapon in our Storm King's Thunder campaign. But
I love the sort of warning that's like Paparacha from was it Steven Universe, who can see the future but 3 seconds late.
Yeah, I love that so much. It was one of my favorite persistent jokes.
You are correct. There aren't actually any animals in this area, just a few Dwerger, but that seemed less interesting since you had all like slaughtered or cowed all of the Dwerger at that point.
Well, there was the one maybe under the table. Hey Rob, was there someone under the table?
Cowed.
Totally.
They were like trying not to piss themselves because they were worried that you would be able to smell it if they pissed themselves. Like at that time, you had slaughtered 8/10 of the Dwerger in the area. They did not want any piece of you.
I like how like even though they won the stealth checks, we all knew that there was like very likely that there was some other invisible thing, and we're just done.
And so honestly, that was it was an ad lib. It was something that I threw in there because I knew you would all be like,
"Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, stay hidden," and then move on.
Okay,
it's okay. I saw that. We know you're here. It's fine. We don't care. If you attack us, you die.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that we just moved on and everyone was like, okay, they're cool, they're hiding, they're not coming after us, because I think Charlotte was at that point, because this was after the Namira thing with Lore of the charming and then the attacking, that I don't know whether or not Charlotte would have been cool if combat had gone down there. So I'm glad that, like, we moved on.
Me too.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Forge is going to become significant going forward, for our own homebrew thing. But yeah, no, it's one of the most disappointing aspects of this is that when you get to the end of the dungeon, your reward is a +2 weapon. Now, a +2 weapon is powerful, and it's way beyond anything you have seen to this point. But, like, the idea that the Forge itself is just a Forge, like, offended me to my very soul.
It's just a forge, my guy.
Yeah, it's not just a forge
fury.
in
It's
this
a mad
continuity.
forge.
The Liberty Bell is
Anger.
just a bell.
Right. Except it's not even really a bell because you can't ring the Liberty Bell. And don't ask
Right?
me how I know.
Fuck it.
I don't have an arrest record. And then,
Now,
of course...
should I be looking at the loot at the end of this campaign or no? Because we might get back to it.
Oh, by all means. By all means. You are more than allowed. And then finally we get to this chasm. And again, like several sessions and several... Good night, Kistrel. Several sessions and several delays later, we finally get down into the Black Lake. And I have to say, I really like the way that particular... Like, we've talked about it both on and off stream, but I really love how this encounter with the dragon ended up going.
I liked it too. It worked really well.
I'm liking it less and less as I see what awesome loot we missed.
You missed a ton of
That
awesome
was in
loot.
the pile of doom.
That's
Oh.
100% true. Let's look at this because you skipped. Now, I brought you Durgadon's sword, which is part of this, the +2 blade, and I also modified it because now it's intelligent and has some other properties. But Nightscale's Horde is made up of, let's start, adamantine plate armor, which Gale knows everything about,
So good.
a very valuable pearl, a cleansing stone, 2 garnets, of course, the +2 great axe that ended up following you, a potion of flying, a potion of healing, a +1 shield, and just a gigantic mound of cash. It's
nothing that appeals to me. I'm good.
It's a
Wand
young
of
dragon's
magic
horde.
missiles.
Oh, speaking of which, Calder, I wanted to mention that the file that you picked up that increases your spell DC, that was something I dropped in as well. That was a piece from Tasha's that I felt would be useful for you.
That was back in.
Yeah, you mentioned that back in Forge and back in
Yes.
Son of the Citadel.
So yeah, the purpose of this was a Roper-like fight. This fight, like we did a simulation of this fight later, and actually went pretty well for you all. Meepo died, but you all ended up doing pretty well. The idea behind this fight is there's this black dragon who lives in the water. It pops its head up, it sprays a bunch of acid at you, and then it goes back into the water and recharges its breath weapon. And until you solve that puzzle, you die. Now, again, we know that you would have solved that puzzle because off stream we ran that combat and you prevailed, albeit at the cost of Meepo's life. But I honestly think that the sort of pseudo combat of the conversation went really, really, really well. And I really liked the very, very, very last thing that I said was something along the lines of, how do you know that I'm not going to just kill you the moment you're in my domain and don't have access to air anymore? Because chaotic evil is chaotic evil, right?
Yes.
And I thought, given the fact that you all failed your first 2 attempts to do anything in that encounter, again, it was almost like the dice were trying to write a compelling story for us.
I'm just saying, I'm glad the oil of etherealness came in handy, finally, in bribing the dragon.
Yes, and I believe you got significant
You give me an
bonuses.
advantage in +5 for that,
Yeah.
because it's a really powerful magic item.
It's just not one that we would have any use for.
No. Yeah, that was a really, really interesting encounter. I'm glad that it went the way it did. It would have been funny if it had gone to combat, but like we would have had to do a whole ass other session for that, right?
I also like how now, in the canon, we have 2 evil dragons that are probably going to become bigger problems that we'll still have to deal with later.
That's true.
And like all now, we just need one of the remaining 3, and then we'll have the complete set.
We need red.
Sooner or later, you've got to encounter like one of the nice dragons, right? One of the metallic ones, like
Nah.
sooner or later.
literally the only quote unquote nice of any of the dragons are the silver. There are the metallics are just less hostile.
Yeah, the coppers are horny, so as long as you're into that, they're nice.
And the
Coppers are
silvers,
horny,
the
bronze
silvers
are-
will use you. That's the thing. Like silver dragons are nice, but they will use you to
Yeah.
to complete their own ends.
Yeah, but their own ends are usually are almost always for the betterment of
True.
of the humanity.
True.
They actively want to improve the lot of the people.
It was an interesting sort of crossover between this and the other campaign that I was running at the time, because there's a silver dragon in Storm King's Thunder who's named Clarion.
Ha.
So I was dealing with Clarions in both at vastly varying levels of power, admittedly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our Clarion could never like spray a 16d6 like ice breath, but
Oh, that attitude.
Yet. You killed him too fast.
and that was
that's
it,
it.
right? Like once you get through the Black Lake, you find your way to the exit, you make your way out, and that was that. And everything,
And
of
get
course, after that is also
Hilariously drunk.
We had that great chat. We had that great like fireside scene. We got to like it was like one of because we had a brief camping scene, and we had in the middle of the dungeon. We had the little scene before the dungeon, but this was like the actual like let's connect and as a party, and that felt really good.
I think it was, given the fast pace of the in-character time, I think it was appropriate, and I think it went really well. I felt like tensions may not have broken there, but they at least like if the tensions in the party were a festering wound, at least, you know, some of the pus was forced out in that particular. I know that's the grossest way I could have possibly described that. But
Great job.
but it was necessary. It wasn't necessarily the cleanest thing, but it was
did
definitely
need to lance
necessary.
The wound, yes.
We got drunk.
We
got wine drunk.
We got wine drunk. We got to process a bunch of stuff emotionally. We even ended on a comedic note.
Yeah.
We talked to Durgadin's soul in a sword.
And
Yeah.
told him not to be
And-
racist, which I
and
love.
And threatened him when he got racist on you. Yeah.
He said something about like wanting to kill all those gray bastards, right? And you were like,
Yeah.
if
And
you're gonna be
Charlotte
racist, I'm gonna
took issue.
drop you and leave you in the sand.
We're just gonna leave you in the middle of the woods.
He's
at
like,
the
I
base
just
your
got
own
out of the
mountain."
dragon's trove. Please don't do it.
Well, and then I do like, as of looking now at what the actual like end of the thing plot hooks are, is like, you know, go back to the village. If you killed all the orcs, you get a celebration. Maybe
Yeah.
sell off
And a
some of
bunch
the
of
loot you
gold.
got.
And like, it's kind of Simpsons-esque back to the start, right? Everything goes
Resets
back
to
to the way
zero.
it was before you ended, and I did not want that to be the way we ended it here. I feel like
Oh,
having
I
some
did have
actual
a-
consequences was necessary. Yeah.
I did have a very, very plot important question
Okay.
that I didn't get to ask in our last episode.
Okay.
Did Kevin Bone Wolf stay there? Or did he come with to meet the army? I need to know.
Oh,
For
good
reasons.
question.
Well, he wasn't having a good time with us anymore.
Yeah,
Thanks
we
to
did. We did.
Moore and Calder steamrolling through. You know, it wound up being Kretha, the one who was being like, we're gonna be like, you know, nice and shit, and like pulling out her noble ring. It's like, look, you know, you guys are just.
I will have an
Two
answer to that
charisma
question
casters.
by the time we meet again in 2 weeks. I don't know exactly how I want it to go yet.
I need the Bone Wolf lore.
I like
Bone Wolf,
using the Boulder's voice from Legend of
Yes.
Korra, but we'll see. He might have just been a bit. Like, Kevin Bone Wolf's pretty awesome, but he's no Meepo. Like, we're not gonna keep him around for a while.
Yeah.
Well, Meepo took off too, so.
That's also true. Meepo is going to have a little bit of his own story. Don't think you've seen the last of Meepo. He will almost certainly make guest appearances here and there, but he is definitely more of a supporting NPC now rather than a. Oh, you're right. The boulder was from Avatar because Tosh wasn't an old lady yet. You're right.
Toph. I wasn't going to say anything.
Tough.
I could talk your ear off for hours about
It's
Avatar.
been a long time since
If it wasn't
I've
for the
seen
fact that you're talking about running a D&D game, we would have to confiscate your nerd card.
So that was the Forge of Fury, friends. Like, that was... We took a series of combat encounters and kind of simplistic traps, and we turned it into what I thought was a really compelling story. But that's the thing about the Forge of Fury. Like, if I was going to say one thing, if I was going to write an Amazon review, not Amazon, fuck Amazon, but if I was going to write a review in general of Forge of Fury, I would say it's a great setting, but you have to bring your own plot. And you have to actively seed that plot, because Forge of Fury, like the Sunless Citadel, has a lot of really good background plot. But unlike the Sunless Citadel, you aren't going to be handed various factions that you can ally with and negotiate with and decide who's going to die and who's going to live. It's really a dungeon crawl, unless you make it something else. I tried really hard to make it something else, and I hope that came through.
I think it did, especially with all of the history tie-ins, how well we connected with the ghost. I certainly didn't feel like it was, like a stand-in for. I did feel there was a deeper plot to everything.
I do want to say as a self compliment. I did all of those visions that you saw as Kretha, like watching stuff and the dream and everything. None of that was pre-planned. None of that was even planned minutes ahead of time. All of those visions as they came out were like spur of the second off the top of my head, and I was pretty proud of how they turned out, given that they were not planned in the slightest.
Oh no, it was good improv.
So pretty happy with those, yeah. This Zargrees 99 asks, what are your final I know, that's just the same joke again. I know, I'm such a hack. What are your final feelings toward the Forge of Fury as a module or in comparison to the Sunless Citadel? And let's start with Gale. What are your final feelings towards this module and comparing it to the previous one?
I definitely have to say, just because of like how schedules and everything shook out for this one, I was less invested overall, because it was, unlike Sunless Citadel, where I designed Echo to be intricate to the plot of the Sunless Citadel, because I was coming in after the fact.
True.
And so he needed a tie-in. This time, Charlotte was along with everybody else in discovering this place and being an outsider looking in, and so it was cool to get that, this plot isn't about me. I'm coming into this with everybody else in the adventuring party kind of feel to it. And I really liked how Charlotte worked, with the mechanics of this, and I liked it. I liked it a lot. We've talked about
wizards
this.
are overpowered.
Abjuration wizards are great, and I do really like this setting, and I liked the extra flavor you gave it. And it was fun, but like we talked about before, I think this has sated my fill of dungeon crawls, and I'm
totally
ready for a different flavor. But this was fun for a dungeon crawl.
Quick pause. Highbane says, isn't the biggest knock on Wizards of the Coast the lack of background and story, or is that not consistent for other modules? Yes, a lot of modules are designed to be an experience rather than a story. And a lot of the time it's up to DMs to inject their own story. That said, I have seen and run and experienced modules that have excellent story as well. I'm hoping one of these days to adapt the second edition Night Below module, which is a story and has a very consistent sort of character arc from beginning to end. But it's a second edition module, so I would have to convert everything to 5th edition, and that would be a big, gigantic pain in the ass. Yeah. But it's a 1st through 18th level campaign, So like, if I ever decide to run that, hopefully I'll run it on this very Twitch channel. Jen, let's talk about Jeff's question. What are your final feelings towards this module and comparing it to Sunless Citadel?
Sunless Citadel felt more polished for obvious reasons. We did have a lot of time that happened in between illness and issues and things like that. It was definitely an experience for me because I've never actually playing modules in and of themselves are an experience to me because all of my D&D has been homebrew the entire time I've experienced it. I've never played a module before. So these have been experiences, but this was also my first character death experience in my entire role-playing career, which has been, since I was 16-ish? So 1996? So I've never actually experienced a character. I've gotten close, but I've never actually experienced a character death. So this has definitely been, there's been a lot of highs and lows with this, interspersed with some weird, long, boring streaks. I'm not as much in on the dungeon crawls. I like my stuff to have story.
Totally
I want it to have story. And I need the story to be accessible in a situation where I have not actually, I don't know the story ahead of time. Like a lot of the background of Dungeons and Dragons stuff where everybody else is talking about this and this and this, I don't know. I just don't know a lot of the lore. So it's interesting. I think that it would have been interesting to have done a module that had more actual story and lore with it. But I liked where you took the boundary. I liked the fact that you actually took what was happening with our characters and our party and also us personally.
Yeah.
Because there was definitely a lot of personal stuff that was happening as well. And took it and modified it as best that you and we could as we went on to try and deal with some of the issues that came up and also give us more of a enjoyment out of the process. But I'm gonna say I am glad it's over and I am looking forward to what's coming up next. It was a slog. Definitely a slog. It was.
I like that it created that feeling of despondency, and I'm also glad that that feeling is over. I think that the dungeon created a mood very, very well, and it's a mood that I'm glad that we get to move on from, but I'm also glad that we experienced it. There was a time not so long ago, and Jeff knows all about this, that I took deliberate pride in the fact that I killed player characters. That was a thing that I used to be really, it's not like I would spring this on characters, right? If a player was coming into my game, I would say, hey, this is probably a really dangerous game. I haven't been that guy. Yeah, I have not been that guy for a while. I
hired you to help run a game for that.
But yes, when I was running Hunter the Vigil with this guy down here, I was often the member of the storyteller team that would get sent in if we wanted a really dangerous, might legitimately kill everybody kind of combat encounter. And I'm glad I got to flex that a little bit with the Roper, but I'm just as glad that I got to skip it with the Dragon. And I actually at this point legitimately feel bad when I kill a player character, even though it was not only a freak accident, but it was also, in service of the story, it turned out. Yeah. But yeah, so Jen, you had a very unique experience here, and I hope I wasn't too heartless when it came to absolutely digesting your character.
I mean, Literally. It was the dice, to be honest.
It really was.
We all went into the same encounter, and
The dice gods were not
my
on
dice
your side.
was not on my side. Yeah, it was. I was struggling to roll well, and you were honestly struggling to roll badly. So, I was just the unlucky one in that point. It really could have been any of us that crit roll would have done, because that would have killed any of us.
There was a villain in a
None
very
of us, I think, were
old,
strong enough to support that.
a
to
very
survive
old
that.
D&D game that I ran, and I don't even remember his name, but he was a villain that I built up and built up and built up, and then he rolled a 1 3 times in a row, and the party just face rolled him. So going forward, anytime someone rolled really badly, they would say, "Oh, I'm rolling like," and they would name that villain whose name I don't remember now.
Oh, jeez.
It was pretty awesome.
Yeah,
Looking at this module as a module, what did you think of it? Final thoughts, and what did you think of it in comparison to the Sunless Citadel? Which, honestly, I think the Sunless Citadel was a stronger product overall.
So I'm looking at it from a perspective as somebody who has experienced the Wizards of the Coast Adventure League and the Pathfinder Society actual plays and stuff. So when I look at a module that is gonna take multiple months to play, I'm already like from a DM's perspective, there's like a thing with that. It's not like the adventure leagues and stuff, they play like 5 hours, maybe 6 at max. So it's like when we're going through a thing that's multiple months, it's like, okay, like at some point about 3.5 sessions in, most of my general thoughts of modules that go longer than like 6 hours is we should be having shorter sessions, because the story beats are there, but they tend to show up by like way of just how long the module is in the middle of a session. So it's like one of those things where like, oh, that would have been like the perfect time to stop. We got an hour. And it's like like there's a couple of good instances in this module and in the previous module that if we had implemented like the talk back at the end sooner, the story beats would have hit exactly at the right time, and it would have been like, oh, it's beautiful, perfect cliffhanger ending, and it's ruined immediately.
Fair enough.
So I guess my feelings in general, aside from like bleed sidebars, that's pretty much the thing that like sticks with me in general. The story, like I could give or take it. Just in general, the combats were good, but like there's sometimes module writers, specifically module writers of earlier editions, where like they only cared about number murder and not about character anything, tend to be lacking on the writing side, in my personal opinion.
That's entirely fair. It's a criticism that a lot of video games have to deal with as well, because
Yes,
if you make a really clean mechanical experience, you now also have to fold in a really clean and satisfying story, and sometimes it's really difficult to see both. Sometimes it's really difficult to make both.
Some games pull it off.
Games absolutely pull it off, but it's when it does, those games are celebrated.
Yeah.
Jeff, I'm pretty sure you're the one that asked the question, but what did you think of the Forge of Fury as a module, and how would you compare it to the Sunless Citadel?
As a module, we kind of already discussed a lot of the material for it, but it is grindy. It is super grindy. And I do not like grindy modules because for me, it's an economy of time. We're all here for an experience. We're all here for role play, and we're all here to play a game. And when combat occurs, all of that grinds to a halt. It's not to say that you can't make those moments occur in a game, even in the middle of combat, the combat has to have investment in it. You have to care about not just the players killing the monsters, but you actually have to care about the stakes.
Yeah.
You have to care about what the fight means. You have to care about, like, and there are ways of doing combat scenarios that have nothing to do with killing the other monster, but have to do things like get to the other side of the room before the door closes. Save a helpless NPC that has like 5 hit points.
Totally.
There are so many ways to do that, and those create different types of tension.
And that was a thing that happened in Sunless Citadel, right? When you went to take on Calcrix, it wasn't just about taking on Calcrix, it was about saving Meepo, and it was about like fulfilling this sort of kind of secondary story goal.
Which made Meepo's storyline all the more satisfying for it.
But the other thing about like the Meepo storyline in that situation, it wasn't like forced.
No.
Like it wasn't part of the module, because like a lot of the things that we're praising here is shit that wasn't in the module.
Yes.
Right? Because like the module is designed to not, in all honesty, and take this as my personal opinion, but modules aren't designed to be run directly from the book at all.
No, they're a template.
Specifically when they're connected to a persistent campaign. If you're putting him in a persistent campaign, one of the DM steps that is honest to God the hardest part about being a DM is that you have to look through the module and go, this is a useless encounter. We need to have a counter that involves this character specifically. And if you don't do that, then one, you probably don't have enough time to DM legitimately. And two, you are literally cheating your characters and the stories and the players by not like putting in the extra effort to be like, the fuck are why would you do this? Unless if your game is like about that, in which case then like you need more of it. But it's like the one of this, like the main thing that the DM does behind the scenes has to go over all the things, because a module, when in a, like, we're not just doing a module, if you're doing a persistent campaign with characters that have backstories, because modules are not designed for characters with backstories. Let's be honest here. They're like, you have to go through it and look at it as a part of the story as a whole, and that just doesn't get done often, in my opinion.
And it's tough to write. It's tough to write a campaign that's like that, unless I suppose you pre-gen the characters and include those characters and their backstories in the module. Like it's
part of the editing process.
Yeah, I suppose theoretically you could write a module with pre-generated characters, like one might do for a LARP, where there are existing relationships that you can make use of. But you're right, a lot of these modules have to be as generic as possible so that they can fit a wide variety of characters.
Well, connects to, if I may, that does connect to what Highbane asked, like that modules that have been put up by Wizards of the Coast feel rather lackluster in terms of details. I would argue that's probably the intent. It wants you to incorporate this into your game, because otherwise they would have, because otherwise it would just be, here's some pre-made characters, or make your own, we don't care, and then they could like lead you by the hand through a very specifically sculpted story. I've seen RPGs that do that. I've seen experiences that are built around that entire concept, and the D&D modules, the big OG of the role-playing world, didn't do that. I have to imagine that has to be a deliberate decision, because that's what the result is. You bring your own plot, you bring your own story, you incorporate everything into a preset set of material. But in the case of Forge of Fury, at least for me, it's way too crunchy. It's just way too much of that grind that we associate with Dungeons and Dragons, that it just it's overwhelming to everything else. There might be some really good flavor in there, but you're still chewing through granite to get to it.
I hope someone clips that particular description, because I think it's really apropos of everything we've been through, both like as characters and as players. I felt like grinding through that there were a lot of really, really satisfying moments, but sometimes it felt like getting to those moments, both from an in-character and out-of-character perspective, took a really long time to get that payoff.
Hello, I am Jeff. I have opinions.
the other thing is that like League play, all of the characters are made with like specific rules like in place because they're all attached to like an in-game guild, right? So like the framing aspect is you got handed this mission, this is what you're doing today, just fucking deal with it, buddy. Everybody gets one of these, you got this one, that's how life go. Whereas like free RPG day RPGs tend to be modules, but they have pre-made characters in it that are designed with hooks to the module themselves.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to look at it that way. And if you want to run a module that is like self-contained, look at one of like the free RPG day modules because that's what they're there for.
Yeah, and I've been to like LARP games where
That are done like that.
Where yeah, characters are outlined, pre-generated. You get to fill in the details, but certain relationships are already pre-generated, so you've got some stuff to work with at the very beginning.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's 9:30 Pacific time. I think we can go ahead and probably wrap this up pretty soon. I think we've said a lot of things that needed to be said about this module, but again, I think that the biggest piece that we can say to folks who are considering running the Forge of Fury, and I think we can all agree on this, is you got to bring your own story. Like,
Feel free to edit.
It's a great...
Like, no, actively edit or else.
Yeah, not just feel free to edit, like actively edit and make sure that the encounters that you're giving people aren't just encounters because that's where they are in the module. Make sure they are appropriate to, you know, the story you're trying to tell.
Look,
I promise you, WotC won't come after you.
Look, I want to throw this out there. You know, everybody says it's not like Gary Gygax is gonna, his ghost is gonna show up in your house and be like, "You're doing D&D wrong." I will.
And I mean, if he showed up, if the ghost of if the ghost of Gary Gygax appeared in my house, I would just kick him in his racist ass. But
well,
yeah,
the point is if you're gonna take this module in specific and just run it flat out of the book, I'll cut you.
Like I said, it can work for some
If you're going to run
folks.
it flat out of the book, have all of your characters have their backstories be tied into this, this specific
have your
module.
characters have no backstory.
Yeah,
Wake
one
them
or the
the
other.
fuck up with amnesia,
One or the other.
or I'll cut you.
honestly, that's gonna be my go-to threat for when people talk about designing modules. Like, just be sure that you include in story material, or M will cut you. And they're gonna ask who's M, and I'm just gonna go, don't worry about it. Just you don't want to know. She'll cut you.
Yeah,
they'll cut you. They'll cut you.
Highbane, non-admins can't post links because I had a bunch of spam bots for a long time, so nothing personal. But Silverkey can post the link if you send it to them. With that in mind, friends, does anybody have any? Do folks have final thoughts that they want to say before we move on? Like, we were thinking about talking about like level 6 and stuff like that, and I know some folks have some things in mind, but we can put that off until next time.
Yeah.
I'm excited to actually play with level 6. I'm super excited.
And as a reminder, and this is important for the 4 of you as well as folks at home, I allow respecs between modules. So if you decide that you want to be a different kind of sorcerer or a whatever, or a different kind of ranger, like, I'm totally fine to let you respec and rebuild your character. I want you to play the character that you want to play. So that's,
I might swap some spells around, but that's about it.
Totally up to you all. Any last thoughts about this particular module before we plug our pluggables and have a good night?
I don't like that I can't edit everything that I want to in Fantasy Grounds.
That's fair. That's 100% fair. I have been wrestling with Fantasy Grounds. As much as it is an incredibly convenient tool, it can also be kind of a tool at times.
Yeah, for sure.
My final thought is, damn, I'm lucky we have a good DM who was able to edit this into an enjoyable
Yeah.
romp.
I appreciate that. It's a good template to work from, but it's only a template to work from. With that, let's go ahead and plug some pluggables. Let's start with Olivia. Go ahead and plug your Tumblr.
There's a Tumblr that's mainly about my character from the Sunless Citadel, A Measure of Separation, but it's misspelled, at tumblr.com. It's a bunch of fan art and, drabbles about AUs. But here's a little teaser for
Uh-oh. Oh, it's so nice. Echo's back.
Huh? What? No, you didn't see anyone. It's fine. That's me.
How did I just notice that the shields that are surrounding Charlotte are little hearts? That's adorable.
Isn't that amazing?
Let me show this off. Let me show this off because I never got to do it in character.
Please
Here's
do.
what Charlotte would look like if she was injured, but she never got injured.
You drew an injured Charlotte, but it never came up.
I was going to switch to it if I ever got to half HP, but I didn't.
Amazing, and I love it.
That's adorable and heartbreaking. I love it. I want to hug. No.
Jen, where can people find you, follow you, and experience you?
I am the Swedish Geekball on Twitch, on Twitter, I'm Tgeekball, on Facebook, I'm Swedish Geekball, on Instagram, I'm the Swedish Geekball, and then I have my Etsy store that is Winter Rose's art shop, and I'm starting to put up prints and things there, so don't know how much of it's going to be Dungeons and Dragons related because that's more my fine art channel kind of stuff. But yeah.
I know you were working on a t-shirt for the Sunless Citadel at one point.
Yes.
How's that project going?
I need to get back into that. That's digital, and I haven't been doing a lot of digital art.
And it's super intricate, so like there's no rush or pressure or anything. But I remember seeing it as a work in progress, as the gang like playing as a band, and it looked so good.
Yeah. I need to work on that some more. I've just been obsessively compulsively being in my studio, because I now have one that's just like a specific room, and I discovered that I love painting. So, I'm painting.
No shame in that.
Absolutely.
So.
Em, where can people find you and like support you and send you
I'm
fan
one
mail.
silver key.
One silver key.
One silver key. Sorry,
Yeah, I did.
Give me a moment. I have ADHD and you broke it. I gotta get back into it. One silver key on Twitter. There's a Facebook page for my streaming, Instagram, the such. I do actually all of these chibis are mine. I'm currently working on potentially getting some sticker packs up and going for them. But that's a project, and I have autism, so it'll happen eventually, I'm sure. If you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, if I ever open up chibi commissions, that's where like the price stuff is gonna go. If you need a reason to actually click the follow button for that, and if you want art. Our art reel that Olivia puts together is basic. We don't have any outside fan art. We just have 4 artists who get bored.
We have a little bit of outside fan art, but mostly it's just us.
We have one outside fan art.
Yeah.
But generally, all of the pieces from the art reels are probably going to be one of us.
Yeah.
So I know that at least Jen also takes commissions sometimes. So like because we are in chat and stuff, you guys can always like poke at us for that reason. But also like follow the Patreon, follow Facebook or Twitter or whatever, because if we're gonna open for commissions, we're gonna put it there, not here on this, not our stream.
Yeah.
So like this is Rob's stream, not us. So follow us elsewhere for that, I guess. That being said, I stream during the weeks and weekends and stuff. So, we got nothing.
Jeff, plug your pluggables.
As I mentioned at the top of the stream, I am still tired and angry on Instagram and TikTok, where I do where I do artistic stuff. I do sketches of people, places, things, characters.
And
so
go ahead.
And yeah, I've been more active lately, so please check it out.
Excellent. You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and Patreon at Math Demigod. And now that we've got some sound clips for the Lost session and I can start putting that together, you'll be able to start seeing the VODs of this very campaign over at youtube.com/gamingmathematically. Yeah, lots of fun. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the out of character, which I should have done a while ago.
What's the difference?
Ooh, it's a different background.
He's
That's
down
the difference.
There.
And yeah, I really appreciate folks hanging out with us. This has been 2 modules and over 60 hours worth of footage. Like, overall, we have been doing this thing for like at least 5 or 6 days worth of content. So those of you who are still with us, who have been here from the very beginning, we really, really, really appreciate you. And yes, Scoots really, really appreciates as well. So yes, if you want to know where this group came from and where they started their adventure, head over to youtube.com/gamingmathematically. Find the Dungeons and Dragons playlist. You can go all the way back to the first session, even before Olivia was with us. There was one session that we didn't even have Olivia with us. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you so much. Chat, say goodbye to the players. Players, say goodbye to the chat.
Goodbye to the
players.
chat.
Excellent. Great. Glad to have you. We will be back in 2 weeks with something brand new, which is module adjacent, module inspired, but not quite like a module. I really hope we get to see you then.
Good night.
Bye.